Hello, my name is Darrell Miller. I'm one of the chief advocates here with Parole Advocates. I'm going to go over a summary of some of the provisions that exist with the Georgia Parole Board and the Georgia Department of Correction. And later series, we will go over some of the provisions that exist for those who are incarcerated and what can be done for those who are newly incarcerated in the county jail system. Okay? So one of the things we would like to go over, what commonly occurs in the Georgia Department of Correction, is that we're finding so many inmates who have been told that they're going to make parole after serving X amount of time. Usually this misinformation is given to them either by judges or by attorneys, where in fact that parole is actually a privilege, not a right. So concerning the time that they may serve in county jail, and in prison, that is actually something that's up to the total discretion of the Georgia Parole Board. So any hopes and aspirations of them making parole should be taken with a grain of salt, and should be understood that they should be fighting for their freedom every day that they exist in the Georgia Department of Correction. Any and everything that can be done to present them in the best light and or to distinguish them from those who are incarcerated should be done. Family members should also do all they can do to assist their loved ones while in prison by allowing whatever favorable information exists to be presented on their behalf. Next, we'll go over those who are in prison for life sentences. For those who are in prison for life sentences, and their crime was committed before January 1st, 1995, the person may be considered for parole after 7 years. And after they're considered for parole after 7 years, they're actually entitled to be considered for parole every year thereafter. For those whose crimes were committed on or after January 1st, 1995, the person may be considered for parole after serving 14 years. And they are also entitled to being considered for parole every year thereafter. Commonly, a lot of inmates are set off anywhere from 1 to 8 years. But they actually are entitled to being considered for parole after serving only 1 more year after their first date that they were considered for parole. Then, as a recent law, as of July 1st, 2006, those who have life sentences must serve 30 years before they're considered for parole. Commonly, the parole board has had a history of applying new rules to cases and new policies to cases that occurred, which crimes occurred before the new policy. That's something that we'll go into later on in terms of how to access those rights. And if your loved one has suffered from not receiving consideration or being set off for extended periods of time, we highly encourage that you should contact us as soon as possible. Our Gmail or email is theparoleadvocates@gmail.com. The word theparoleadvocates@gmail.com. Our telephone number is 404-855-4569. Factors that can affect one making parole or not making parole. First, factors that can affect your loved one not making parole. If they have poor institutional conduct. Poor institutional conduct means that they have received either a disciplinary report, that they have some institutional infractions, they have committed new crimes, they have not performed their work details in a timely and fashionable manner in which satisfies the criteria of the Department of Corrections and their staff, or that there are records that have been presented concerning why this person should not make parole that may come from family members or loved ones of the victims, or if the crime was an aggravated crime and that reports indicate evidence support that the crime was heinous, malicious, or in some way deserves one doing more time than was given if a person did receive a life sentence. Next, I'll go over the steps and the procedures of the process of one making parole. The first process is that usually when one goes into prison, that a file is prepared. And that file that is prepared by the initial parole officers in the intake centers, in the Georgia Department of Correction centers, that file goes to the parole board, and they make an assessment as to how much time that person should serve before they are considered for parole. This is usually the first initial assessment as to the likelihood of that person making parole. There are other incidents and times in which the person will come up for consideration for parole that they may be able to make parole. The Georgia Parole Board hearing examiners, they take this file and they prepare this file for the actual parole board members or the clemency directors. And they can also add on to how they feel as to whether the person should make parole at that time or a later time. The parole board guideline plays into effect concerning whether or not that person should or should not make parole, and when they should make parole, if they are allowed to make parole. Their previous record, whether they were employed when their crime occurred, their education, whether they had a GED at the time in which their crime was committed, and several other factors go into whether or not they should actually make parole or not, and when they'll make parole. The grid guideline system is a very complex system. You can contact us later for getting more information on the grid guideline system, or you can go on the Georgia Board of Pardons Parole website and try to access the grid guideline system. Usually every inmate receives a grid guideline, and that grid guideline gives them an idea as to how and where they fall in the whole scheme of the parole eligibility guideline system. Next, we'll go over one of the important factors that relates to the likelihood of your loved one making parole and when they'll make parole is how the parole board sees them upon their release. One representative of the parole board conveyed to me one day that he only usually tries to assist those in making parole who he would feel comfortable with that person living next door to him. So take in mind and consideration as to your loved one as they come close to making parole, or they're trying to do the things that allow them to make parole. In honesty, is this person that you would want living in your neighborhood? Now, I'm here to assist the inmates, but I'm saying to you that your loved one, you need to give them the understanding that that's the perspective by which the parole board looks at in terms of who should make parole. Their likelihood to reoffend, part of that is who they associate and affiliate with, what steps of preparation they've made to re-enter society as a law-abiding citizen, what steps have they made and actions have they taken to reduce the likelihood of them making parole, what type of neighborhood and environment they're going back to, and how prepared are they to re-enter the job market in the workforce or create a job for themselves upon their release, now being a convicted felon. I'll now continue this first session. In summary, please tune in and view our next session. If you have any questions, you can contact us by emailing us at theparoleadvocates, the word the, paroleadvocates@gmail.com, and we'll gladly assist you to the best of our ability. Thank you for tuning in.